We're very pleased to have Mélanie Jouitteau with us today. She did her PhD at the University of Nantes in Brittany under Hamida Demirdash, and she's now a research scientist with the CNRS Bayonne, which is the French National Center for Scientific Research. Her research interests touch on many areas of Celtic syntax. A non-exhaustive list includes work on agreement and the verb to have in Breton, the relationship between Breton and other Celtic languages, as well as her dissertation, which proposes that SVO, verb second, and VSO languages all generalize as XP VSO. She's also done a lot of work on dialectal variation in Breton, including traditional dialects as well as Neo-Breton spoken by younger speakers. And she's also done a lot of work on the Arbre project, which is an online grammar of Breton and collection of linguistic resources for the language. A fun fact about Mélanie is that she attended and presented at the first FOCL conference, which we learned is actually in 2003, not 2009, like was mentioned last time. And she also performs in Breton language theater, at least when there's not a pandemic going on. I'll now cede the floor to Mélanie, who will share her screen. So let's welcome our speaker.
Thank you guys for the welcome. So this is not the right one, sorry. Sorry, I just have to share the right presentation, the PDF one. Okay, sorry. So the presentation today is an investigation of embedded verb second phenomena, and I have to mention that it's part of a research project led by Maya de Guinée about verb second orders in the lab of Bayonne in ICR-CNRS. Okay, Breton, as you know, is the Celtic Brythonic language spoken in Western France. The data here comes from a series of elicitation. The most data we're going to see is from the Léon dialect with two traditional speakers. The two of them are over 75 actually now. The data is compared with a speaker from the red area. Actually, the arrow is badly placed here. And this speaker resisted completely to embedded verb second of the type we're going to see today. So this is just control. No Neo-Breton, nothing. This is dialectal with traditional speakers. So the protocol consists of translation tasks from French, which is an SVO language, Romance. We both face my computer screen. I provide rich context, especially for the embedded sentences with extraction, because it can get a bit tricky. The speaker takes all the time needed. Lexical items can be replaced if they need so. I write their translation on the computer screen, and then we discuss it and they correct me. At the end of that process, I ask them to read the sentence out loud to confirm that they are happy with the translation. And once we have one embedded sentence that they like, we play permutation of the elements and they provide grammaticality judgments. Just to one precision, those speakers I know from about, well, a long time, let's say. I don't want to say stupid things, but a long time. It's not my first work with them, so it made it easier to work about embedded, which is not always that easy. If you're curious about the data, all the raw elicitation data with the glosses in French, with the detailed description of each elicitation is online. You can find it on the Arbre website. And the arrow points you toward the resource Centrale d'Élicitation, the Elicitation Center. So we have a roadmap today. First, a little teaser for you to grasp the basic conundrum. Then I'm going to show you how I derive the Breton matrix verb second by the left edge filling trigger. And I'm going to show you how it designs a type of verb second that is also represented in Germanic, Romance, and also Tohono O'odham, which was the reason why I wanted to visit in March. In 4, next, we're going to see how left allows for optional embedded 10-second in the Leon dialect, and then summarize and mention some remaining problems. You ready? Let's go. So canonical verb second, we raise the verb in the structure, and then we have a subsequent movement of a constituent that fills in the preverbal position. Of course, when we say verb second, what we mean is tense second, because we have tenses, and then it's the tense auxiliary that is related to the second position phenomena. During all the talk, in order for you to see directly where the tensed element is, it's going to be written in red. So just look for the red element in the sentence, and we're going to talk about what's before. So that would be canonical tense second, which we call V2 for fast, but we know it's tense second. Now there is a type of 10-second, which is a bit particular. We know it by stylistic fronting, in, for example, in Faroese or Icelandic or Breton. In those cases, the lexical head of the non-tensed verb, the infinitive or the past participle, can front and fill in the preverbal element. And this is kind of weird because we are used to more fleshed constituent in the first slot. Breton goes a bit further in being linear, in being blind to the distinction between big constituents and heads, because it also allows for complementizers to fill in the preverbal position, the pretense position. Actually, it allows for any type of head to fill in the preverbal position. So this is the reason why it's called linear tense second. So you see already, when we think of embedded structures, the prediction it makes. All embedded structures start with a complementizer, so we should not see any last resort operation for verb second, because verb second should always be minimally realized in an embedded by the presence of the complementizer. Yep. Andrew, you wanted to ask something? No? Okay. Okay, so we have, sorry, we have a generalization that works well for matrix sentences in Breton, and it predicts that we should not have last resort operations for 10-second, but you have the tensed element in red, and before it, you see a Q head, type of complementizer, and then there is an expletive. It's actually homophonous to the third-person singular masculine independent pronoun, ien, so he. It's been traditionally analyzed as an expletive, and it's kind of a weird one because, well, it appears only in the Träger dialect, but also it's embedded to, it's restricted to embedded domains. So these expletives serve specially to saturate a requirement that we thought did not exist in embedded domains. On top of that, it's last resort for 10-second because it is in complementary distribution with stylistic fronting. In 2, the expletive has dropped, but the past participle has crossed in order to fill in this position. So how come the bound on tense first does not see somehow the Q head in 1 and 2? And this inquiry, what if it could tell us something about the syntactic integration of embedded tense second? So I derive the word order in matrix by what I call left. This is just the name for this mystery, but I know where, well, I think I know where the mystery happens. So left, the left edge filling trigger is after syntax. At the output of syntax, the structure is linearized in a morphological realizational module before phonological realization. This module basically treats the clause like a word, and left amounts to an obligatory exponent effect at the scale of this sentence. So accordingly, left effects are last resort after acid violations, because it's out of syntax, it doesn't care. There is no impact at LF, but it should be blind to PF. It's well known that topic drop, for example, makes a sentence okay. So in V2 languages, in T2 languages, we can start the sentence with an inflected verb. We just have to know that we are not pronouncing something before. We should find linearity that I mentioned already. We're going to see ultra-local movement and excorporation playing inside this module. And also we are going to see two types of operation that are hallmarks for morphology, which is idiosyncrasy and sensitivity to plus versus minus nominal features. So here you see a fully developed CP of a sentence in Breton. In red, you have the bundle of elements that form the inflected verb. It starts with fin, the fin head that is realized in this language. After that, we could have an object clitic and the inflected verb ending with the tense morphology and agreement. So what happens to the structure is that it's going to linearize before the A line. I'm going to go back later to what happens on the top of the tree. But the idea is that we linearize that, and then left will apply in a post-syntactic structure. So let's see a bit closer what happens. The structure is linearized and transforms the clause into this complex morphological word. The tense head H1, that is in red, contains different morphemes. We saw the fin head, then next the lexical material of the verb, the morpheme X, and tense morphology at the end. And I mentioned here in the structure in 3, the next head H2. It's the constituent that has linearized immediately after H1, whatever, irrespective of the identity of this head. Then we enter the morphological module, and left filtrates the linearizations where the tensed element H1 is on the left edge. It triggers ultra-local repairs of 4 types. In A, you see the merge of an expletive. In B, what happens is that the H2 head is fronted by ultra-local movement across the tense head in order to fill in the left edge. In C, what happens is that the morpheme X, the lexical verb, has been excorporated out of the compound, out of H1. It's pronounced before as an infinitive. Not in all dialects. In some dialects, we can see that it can be shorter than infinitives, but it globally looks like an infinitive. And then the tense morphology needs morphological support. Then we insert the auxiliary ober, which is do, so do support. D is basically the same story. We evacuate by excorporation the lexical content of the verb, but instead of asking for do support, we just repeat the verb, and then we have first the infinitive form of the verb, and then the inflected form of the verb. Now in A, B, C, or D, left is happy, and after left, fin agrees in nominal or non-nominal category with the element on its left. So if we go back to the structure, it means that fin will agree in category with whatever is on its left. It can be brought by syntax between A and B, or it can be moved to its left at linearization. So let's see a little bit with Breton data how it works. So this is standard Breton, nothing weird here. For this is object fronting. We have fronted the object by focus. This is the only way to do it because it's too far away. We could not move it by left movement. So this sentence is restricted to a focus reading on the object. In 5, however, the site of extraction of the subject is right in H2. So it could have been left fronted, in which case this sentence has 2 readings. It can be with a focalization on the subject or not. In both cases, object fronting or subject fronting, the fin head says, hey, I just saw a noun is on my left. In 6, the adverb has been moved or merged here, depends on where we think it is. But anyway, fin after left says, hey, what's on my left is not a nominal, and then it takes the E form and applies the right. With this basic data, we already see that there is a question for Germanic linguistics that is resolved for Breton, which is the question of where exactly the verb raises, because it always raises on the right of the fin head. The system is also clearly not of the strict orders. It qualifies as the at least 10th second type. And this is typical of Old Romance, Retro-Romance, or Caritiana, but also Germanic Moceno or Cimbrian. I give you an example briefly in 7. In 7, you see a hanging topic with the break that makes it recognizable. But despite the presence of the hanging topic, we still need something in the structure that's linearized between A and B. And it can be either the adverb now or an expletive, but something has to be here. Just a quick peek at what linear 10 second is in matrix sentences. In 8, you see an example of a Q head that saturates the preverbal position. In 9, it's a very special verb because its morphology fuses with a C head. It's the only verb in the language that can be tensed like this. Superficially at the initial, and this is because of the in 10. Negation can also saturate the preverbal position. It can stand alone before the inflected verb. And we have a good argument that the negation is actually ahead because it triggers that trace effect. If we front the subject, then Jana Lisa, which is a plural subject, has its feature reflected on the agreement morphology in 10, which of course in Celtic it should not have otherwise. We also saw that the phonological realization of a C head does not block verb raising. And this is a contrast, of course, with Germanic languages. Realization of the C head can lead to verb final. Symmetric T2 languages in Germanic do have, like Faroese or Icelandic, do have some T2, and they can satisfy it by stylistic fronting. But in those languages, the complementizers are not satisfiers. And linear T2 is there relative to a subject gap. So in terms of left, it means that in Icelandic, we would have to linearize the structure below the complementizer because it seems completely invisible to the T2 requirement. Finally, we have a close from you a linear 10-second language, Tono Odam. You see in 1 that the auxiliary in 2 is fused into the Q head in the manner that aimant in Breton was. Just a quick word on some left repairs and information structure. The T2 matrix word order can be a byproduct of information structure or of the numeration. So if we have the privable element, the privable slot filled in by a focus WH or a topic, then we will get classic 10-second. And if the syntax by the numeration just saturates this with a head, then we would get linear T2. But it means that left repairs will arise only in positive, affirmative, matrix, wide focus sentences. So if we want to test for left operations, they have to be last resort and they have to be in positive, affirmative, matrix, wide focus sentences. Likewise for embedded, of course. Typical left effects, would be from 11 to 14. 11 is the expletive. The expletive is a shortening of the verb to be. It's the infinitive. From dialect to dialect, we can see it move, but it's always the shortening of the infinitive form of the verb to be in this particular dialect. In 12, we see stylistic fronting, which is also called long head movement, a term that comes from the Slavic empirical domain, where they have similar movements. 13, you see the excorporation case with do support, and the result in the data is an analytic tense with do auxiliary. And finally, 14, to know, I know. This is the case where after excorporation, we have repeated the copy of the excorporated element. Now 14 is restricted to an idiosyncratic list of verbs. So this is, of course, a hallmark of morphology. Left repair strategies, we saw, is going to be able to violate syntactic rules, like the head movement constraint. We're not supposed to cross a head with another head in syntax. That's okay, because we're not doing it in syntax. And it also violates the bound on excorporation, but we are doing it in the morphological module. Left is last resort, so it predicts accurately that we have no expletive strategy available in either in co-occurrence with a focus, a WH, a topic, a Q head, a negation head, a C head. We never have two double expletive strategies, so left cannot apply twice ever. What I think are excorporated elements I never find in the IP domain on the right of the tensed element. Also, the focus or the topic reading on the preverbal element can be avoided only by elements that are brought post-verbally by the derivation. So if we have a wide focus sentence and something has been moved before, this has to originate right on the right of the inflected verb 8-1. Last characterization, ultralocality. There is a complete absence of long-distance relationships or A-bar properties in those repair strategies. And we can engineer intervention effects with if we change the H2, then we see that it's going to be this H2 that's going to front with left. So we are well equipped to look at what happens in matrix 10-second in Breton now, and I want to show you some really mysterious facts just before we step into the embedded. In 15, we have a coordination marker. We have the empty slot that should be filled in by left, and then the tensed element. This word order in 15 is okay in all dialects. So this is the case, for example, in 16. The context is that was quite expensive at the time. And then the speaker starts with a completely new topic and says, and we used to start the work season in February until the end of September. So here, what happens in terms of left? I see two scenarios. One is that for some reason, after linearization, left can see the coordination marker outside of the domain of H1, but still consider that it's okay. So it reaches out of this domain in order to fill in and get a linear 10 second, or this head licenses a null adverb with some kind of weak consecutive meaning that we could not grasp here. And then this is this null adverb that would fill in the position. I cannot decide which scenario is the right one, but you can see why it's interesting when we are going to turn to embedded orders, because the head that is a coordination marker can be ignored and can be taken into account. So could it be the case that when we look at embedded 10 second, this is actually the structure that we are seeing? Could it be that it's a matrix clause, a root? So let's step now into left effects in embedded domains. So that's going to be all the Leon dialect. The Kearney speaker rejected all left effects in embedded domain extremely persistently. The generalization in theoretical terms would be that the morphological domain where left applies can optionally exclude the complementizer for some reason that we have to discover. So let's look at 18. The sentence means Mimi thinks that this idiot will have cut the edge higher than last year. Mimi change, and then empty complementizer, no problem. Most speakers in all dialects would answer A, ik droeg haar zouden ze, with the verb first. So this is strongly preferred, and the speaker clearly preferred that word order. This is the order that they give first. But then you try permutate the elements, and well, B is okay. Mimi jonge, troch het nu zouden ze, blah, blah, and the rest is also okay. And you ask them what's the difference, and they're like, oh no, it's good too. In 18C, you have this aspectual particle that's before the inflected verb, and it's okay too. So we get clearly last resort linear V2 inside an embedded. From 19 to 22, this is basically a reduplication of the data with another speaker. Let's just look at 22 because it's an analytic tense and the causal complement of a noun. So it says he had the good reputation that he could fix everything. And we see an analytical tense in this embedded here. So back to the question, is the embedded 10-second clause semantically integrated? We have good arguments, I think, to say that it is. The embedded is visible for binding of referential expressions like the C condition. In 23, Amelia, the subject of the matrix, and the child, the subject, because it would be a violation of the C condition. Quantifier binding tells us also that the embedded T2 clause is semantically integrated. Nobody ever tells he stole the beautiful plates. We have this binding by the quantifier in the matrix and stylistic fronting inside the embedded. Oops. Syntactically, is the embedded 10-second clause syntactically integrated now? I believe that the strong data is in 25 and 26 with an object extraction across an embedded SVO. In those contexts, it was clear that the subject was given, that it was not fronted by focus inside the embedded. I would like to show you a stylistic fronting with the same extraction, but I just didn't have it. And for the moment, I cannot go back to the speaker to check this. But extraction, of course, is a strong argument that we have those embedded sentences that are truly syntactically integrated. Adjuncts cannot be extracted from a 10-second embedded. Well, this is a weak island effect, and this is not a counter-argument to the integration in syntax. Note that in Breton, it's not possible to get rid of the extraction facts to still maintain that we have two roots, because the matrix is not a possible parenthetical. This is a problem for Germanic linguistics, because when they have Welchen Film, hat sie gesagt, haben die Kinder gesehen, like in German, they don't really know if the matrix is not actually a parenthetical, in which case they would be testing just a matrix sentence. But in parentheticals in Breton are verb first, or they are restricted to some frozen expressions with some pronouns. This is not the case that we just saw in the extraction cases. So no getting rid of the extraction cases. There is a set of other asymmetries between roots and embedded verb second. Temporal nouns like of the type my future husband are restricted to a deictic interpretation in root clauses. In clausal complements, they are not, despite it being 10th second in 29. Also, when we look at 10 second in matrix and in embedded, we see asymmetries. 10 second is mandatory in matrix sentences of Breton, rarely so in embedded. In embedded clausal complements with the MTC head, 10 second is always optional. Also, it looks like the left effects that we see are less productive in embedded. For a given speaker, creation of an expletive by movement, if possible in an embedded, is always available in a corresponding matrix sentence, but the reverse is false. One of the speakers has verb doubling in matrix, but not in embedded, never. Also remind the trigger dialect example where we saw an expletive dedicated to an embedded position, which is unavailable in matrix. Next argument, to try to understand what left is about in embedded domains. We know that clausal movement forces C to linearize into H1's domain. What does it mean? If we take a clause and we move it, then it's not possible to have the optionality of seeing the C head at linearization or not. It's like once you move it with it, you're trapped with a complementizer. So this is not easy to test in most dialects because as well known in standard and shown you in 33, it's not possible in most dialects to front a clausal complement. Before working on that, I had no idea it was possible, but I have a speaker who is happy to do it in 34. So she fronts the clausal complement. If it's verb first with the empty complementizer before, but she cannot have it if it's 10th second. So again, in 35, it's possible to have this clausal complement with 10th second if she doesn't move it, but if she moves it, then she cannot have it 10th second. A weird feature is that it looks like syntactic location matters for left to apply, in particular for adverbial clauses. Part of this mystery I can explain, and I will, and part of the negation in matrix clause, and it's been widely scope over a 10-second cause clause. So what does it mean for the data? It means that if we have the negation inside the embedded, it is not the case that he came, and this is because he's lazy, because it was too far, he didn't want to drive, etc. Then negation, if it's in the matrix clause, it cannot scope over the 10 seconds. So if we have, it is not the case that he came and this is because he's lazy. This is the, no, I have to cheat and look at the Brighton case. This is where T2 is possible. But if the negation applies, yeah, of course, if the negation applies on the entire domain, then we cannot have 10 seconds. So if we have the meaning, which is, it is not the case that he came because he's lazy, but he came for another reason, then if we get this interpretation, we cannot have V2 anymore. So in terms of her terms, central adverbial clauses resist 10 seconds, whereas peripheral adverbials don't. It's kind of easy to understand why adjuncts, when attached higher, are out of the reach for negation, but why can't they be 10 seconds when they are attached lower? I don't have the answer for that. I just can show that it's also the case in Brighton. So in 38, the cotext forces the reading. It is not the case that he came and the situation is because he's lazy. And we can have in 39, the other reading is forced by the context, which is, don't be nasty, he didn't come with me only because I have a car and he didn't want to walk. He didn't come because he's lazy, but to speak together. And in this interpretation forced by the context, it is not possible to have verb second anymore after the cause complementizer. The situation is quite the same with another complementizer, pas. To my surprise, because this is really far from standard, I could get with both speakers diverse T2 orders embedded after pas in both the central or peripheral adverbial reading. But so embedded verb second with it was possible, but specifically stylistic fronting I could obtain only if this entire structure was fronted, like in 42. So 42 stylistic fronting is okay under the complementizer pas, but if it's the central one, it's not possible anymore. And well, this is where it crumbles for me. I don't know exactly how to grasp this. So what do we know? Because we are almost done. The generalization is that in some Leon varieties, the morphological domain where left applies can optionally exclude the complementizer, except if the clause is moved, in which case it cannot exclude the complementizer, and in case of central adverbial clauses, for reasons to be determined. Left makes accurate predictions on dialectal and morphological variability, but does not account for the restriction on central adverbials. But we still learned important things, like embedded 10 second is not an afterthought. In extraction cases, the afterthought would start before the thought, which would be weird. Also, these are performance related, and on the opposite, the embedded cases we saw are not found in free corpus, They are found in elicitation. So this is the reverse of the environment where we would have afterthought. We have good arguments that embedded second phenomena are not roots. They are syntactically integrated. Some of them are 10 higher clauses in syntax. So 10 second, when we have it, we know that syntactically it was integrated, but at the level of syntax, maybe it was not 10 second. It was tens first and then left, applied some makeup on it. So this demands a post-syntactic merge analysis à la Wormbrand. Her idea is that we have either fully integrated clauses like in 44, where we merge the clauses in syntax, but then we have an alternative, which would be to merge them at another level after syntax, which calls transfer. And then we would get partially non-integrated clauses. And then with this partially or non-integrated clauses that are just merged at transfer, it's spell out that would decide if it is partial integration or non-integration. Crucially for her, she would say that it is when spell out designed a single spell out domain that we can still have quantifier binding. But of course, this story does not hold with extraction cases because it shows syntactic integration. Also, there should be no asymmetries between root and metric and embedded phenomena. If embedded 10-second orders were matrix clauses selected by the matrix verb, the complementizer would belong to the first and be syntactically invisible to the second. So we need the complementizer in the embedded in syntax. We need it to be present in syntax, and we need to be merging syntax because embedded structures vary in size depending on their complementizer. You remember that in matrix, I saw the time. I'm a little bit over time, but we are almost done. Sorry, I lost track. Yeah, we saw in matrix sentences that we can have up to T6 orders, like we can stack a lot of stuff before the inflected element in Breton. The same can happen in embedded domains. In 45, you have such an example. We have here elements that are motivated by focus. They are not related. They are not fronted here by left effect. They are motivated by the information structure, but there is enough place in the articulated structure to welcome them before the inflected verb. And these type of examples, I could pile up. A beautiful one is in 41, where we have embedded OSV and embedded SOV. So we need the complementizer to say, okay, I select for a structure that has this much place. Or what is going to be moved in syntax. So, and this is my conclusion. What do we need? We need syntactic embedding, and that's because we have intervention effects and extraction. We need complementizer selection and truncation. We need to be able to account for the variation of allowed maximal 10-second embedded orders depending on the C head. Embedded CPs can linearize without their complementizer. It's not the first choice of the speaker, but it is an option in some dialects. And left in a post-syntactic morphological module repairs those linearized orders. Now, resistance of central adverbials to T2 remains. So that's it, and thank you for your attention.
All right.
Where are you all? Hi, back.
Please turn on your videos and give our thanks to our speaker.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the question period. If you have more questions, please post them in the chat. But we'll start with a couple of questions about this left that needs to be satisfied. So one question is about the strictly VSO embedded clauses. And the question asks, perhaps they missed this, but what is satisfying left in the strictly VSO embedded clauses?
The complementizer.
Complementizer. Okay. And I have another question about also satisfying left. You mentioned that there was one speaker who did not allow verb doubling to satisfy left, if I am remembering correctly.
Specifically, it's a speaker. I told you about a speaker who has verb doubling in matrix, but not in embedded.
Okay. So I was curious about how these sorts of, like, what is allowed by different speakers in different dialects to satisfy this condition, if it varies as a factor of the different dialect. You're mentioning you're focusing on the Leoneg speakers, but you also had another speaker from, was it Cornway or was that a Van Tay?
Kearney.
Okay. So I'm curious if what is allowed to satisfy left, how that varies across different dialects, and if you've noticed any kind of consistent continuum or pattern across different dialects or across different speakers.
Okay. Dialectal variation in Breton, it's like the Amazonian forest. It's truly amazing. We have no idea what's going on. Well, we do have some ideas, but it's like we have a torch in the forest, and there is a set of things that we have tested, but the rest is just unaccounted for. So when you tell me that I focus on Leon speakers, I'm blushing. I just have enough to get a plural because I have two. In order to get embedded judgments from those speakers, it's extremely time consuming if you want to make it right, if you want speakers to have the time, if you want to come back again and again and again to check your data so that you're not presenting one sentence you got, but you're presenting one sentence because you have checked that this is the pattern that you get. I should not continue on that trend because I'm going to be too long, but come work, there is work to do. There is part of the dialectal variation that we can already account for looking at the monographs and the summarizing that has been done already, but this could be only the beginning of a wonderful work.
And could you say anything, if you know how this phenomenon kind of interacts with the Neo-Breton varieties, like what is being taught in schools, how it compares and contrasts? Because you mentioned that with these dialects, there's a lot of people who may not accept them as valid,
No, this is, thank you for raising the question, because this is a very important point, and also scientifically, not only for prescriptivism. My answer for learners would be, don't try this at home. Clearly, don't try left effect in an embedded. I'm not trying this in my Breton. I'm an L2 in Breton. I would never speak like this because I haven't, I don't master what's happening here. But those traditional speakers, they do. They have no problems doing it, and that's it. Neo-Breton, Standard Breton, and most varieties of Breton, and a nice lady in Kearney absolutely disagree that it should be possible.
Thank you. I have another question about last resort, a clarification question. So in the examples you gave, where many different elements could fill this position, subject, object, potentially a form of the verb. You mentioned that there was this last resort, what looks like an expletive. The question is, how can something be called last resort when there are these other options?
Well, if you have another option, if you have a focused element, you never have a left effect. Never. If you have something else before, which is not a hanging topic or a sense-setting adverb, you will never have stylistic fronting, never have an SVO in wide focus reading, never have an analytical tense. Never, ever. If in some dialects, because if in some dialects they have focus on it, and in some dialects they do report, for example, for verb doubling, or even for some analytic tenses, like the do support, some speakers would say that they feel a focus effect. This, I'm not talking of those varieties here, and I don't know what they can do. Nobody went to test them to see if they could have a left, what I call a left effect, and those structures.
Okay,
but
thank you.
For the speakers that I work with, it's completely wide focus and last resort in the strict sense.
Okay, so just to clarify or summarize, you're saying that in the cases where you don't have last resort, it's because there is some sort of focused element that moves up to fill that position, but when you don't have that available, that's when you would get this last resort filling by the expletive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that goes in syntax before the tensed element will render the left inert. There is no reason for it to apply. It can come from the numeration or from information structure. It can be a head, it can be a bigger constituent. It doesn't matter. If there is something, then we will never, never see the left effects.
So if there are any other questions, feel free to post them in the chat, or we can open up the floor if there are more. That expands the list of questions that we received during the talk. I'll allow anyone to ask any other questions though. All right. Well, if we have more questions, go ahead, Andrew.
Bronwyn,
Yes,
have a question?
Oh, sorry.
I was trying to volunteer to take a question, but I didn't want to just unmute myself.
Sure, go right ahead.
So this is maybe a sort of conceptual question, because the ability of zero complementizers to fill that first position is really, really neat. And I sometimes wonder about whether it should surprise us that that's possible sort of on the PF branch, that a zero complementizer gets to fill an initial slot after syntax, though before, we're all the way to phonology. And I just wondered if I wanted to invite you to share thoughts about that and what that tells us about when phonology enters into this consideration of what's initial. Maybe this doesn't make sense, but.
You agree with me that the complementizer should be in syntax, right? In syntax, it's present.
Right, yes.
Okay. Then I think of it as a topic drop. So we have this element that is present in syntax, and it has a morphological structure. We don't know yet that it's not going to have a phonological realization. We're not there yet in the model. So it's the same. For left effect, for the morphological component, there is no way to see if this is going to be realized or not. Now, there is a language where it looks like there is left effects on the morphological component and another layer downstairs that looks like left but phonological, and that ensures that something has, well, you have phonological operations that would make sure that the second placement phenomena is respected in that module. And this is Tohono O'odham. So I think we could learn a lot by looking at the last resort effects of 10-second in Tohono O'odham.
Oh, thank you.
You're definitely going to have to come visit and do some field work.
Please.
All right. Well, it looks like we are just about at noon. So let's thank our speaker once again.
Thanks to you all.
Yeah.